also defined by what we do, what we actually do. Everybody makes mistakes. And that's not what makes you who you are. It's how you respond to that.
Right. Welcome to the Leading with Vulnerability podcast. I'm your host, Yuma Barnett, and today my guest is Jeff Wright. Jeff is a former Army officer, former FSO. He a member of 1st Ranger Battalion, did 4 years in the Army, got out of the Army, and is now in the financial space. We are actually up in his office in Atlanta. It's nice to get out of my bedroom studio, and I'm glad that I'm thankful that he hosted us up here. But Jeff is somebody who's always given back to the 75th. He's always come down on a moment's notice and given financial brief or financial advice to anybody, to some of our companies or battalions or small groups that we have, and we're very thankful for him. And he's got a great story that I know will have value to everybody that's listening, and I'll hand it over to Jeff and let him introduce himself, and we'll get on with the conversation.
Yeah, well, welcome to Atlanta. Glad to have you up here, and thanks for having me on. I'm truly humbled because the previous guests have just been so tremendous, and I'm honored to be among that group. I grew up in kind of an Army family. My dad was a West Point grad in 20 years, so we bounced around a lot growing up. In fact, his dad was a 20-year Army officer as well. And we kind of settled in Texas. I went to high school in San Antonio and college at UT Austin. My dad's side of the family is from Texas, and they all live in Texas. So Texas is sort of home-ish, having moved around as an Army brat. So.
Texas isn't a bad place. The only thing bad in Texas is the Cowboys, and we could save that debate for another show. But you are on the Leading with Vulnerability podcast. I'd like to know what your definition and your thoughts on that word are.
Yeah, I think vulnerability is putting yourself in a place of exposure or perceived, harm, with the express intention of building a relationship with that person that you're talking to.
I like asking that question because everybody has a different definition of what it is, and I don't think anybody's wrong, right? Vulnerability is something that you need, I think, to be. Vulnerability is leadership. Yes. Being the leader is being vulnerable. So it's always good to just hear perspectives, and which is another big word in leadership. So your time in the Army, right? What drew you to the Army first, and then in the Army you decided to go chase, go to the 75th. What led to that?
I initially entered the ROTC program at UT Austin, really just for the scholarship. I mean, I was kind of interested in the Army, but I wanted to do the scholarship, and that was right before 9/11. 9/11 happened my freshman year, two weeks in.
Oh wow!
So I'm brand new to ROTC and really what the Army is like, and brand new to college and all that stuff. And like a lot of people, that changed my paradigm and what I wanted to do in terms of serving. And eventually I grew, one thing I realized with that and anything in the Army and thereafter is you get out of something what you put into it. Yeah. So the more I poured into wanting to be a better cadet and future officer, that's when, the interests build and things like that. I had an instructor who was an NCO from the Ranger Regiment, so I learned a lot about it, and that's what I wanted to do. So going into the Army, I wanted to be in the 75th Ranger Regiment specifically. Didn't have any aspirations for SF or anything like that. It was, I need to be in the regiment. And in fact, I was a highly rated cadet, and you go through, the branch selection process. And so I had infantry as my first choice. My second choice was field artillery, simply because at the time that was the only officer branch that was in a Ranger line company as the FSO. So that was my backup plan. Well, sure enough, the cadet board says he's a highly rated guy that his number 2 choice is the least popular branch. You know what I mean? So, which is fine. I was actually afforded tremendous opportunities to go to Ranger School after OBC, and then my first duty station was in the 82nd at Fort Bragg during the surge. So we had a long trip there, and I was actually given the opportunity to lead an infantry platoon. So I was a fire support officer for a little while.
That happened quite a bit in those times.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and I was going through the process of branch transfer. We get back from Iraq, this long trip, and I think my timeline's passed for regiment. So I'm like, I need to just branch transfer at this point because I don't want to go back to an artillery battery. I've never been in a battery.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So I don't know anything about fire direction or anything like that. And so I was getting ready to submit a branch transfer package, and my now wife and fiance at the time, we were, buying a house. We were under contract on a house. Then I got a call from the regiment saying, "Hey, you got a rope date in 2 weeks." Well, when the regiment calls, you don't say no.
No, that's right.
So I backed out of that contract, lost my earnest money, which is nothing in the scheme of things, and on 2 weeks' notice, went on down a rope.
So what year was that you went to rope?
2008, or very early 2008, like the very beginning of 2008.
Okay, so when you left the convention, and how long did you deploy with the 82nd?
Yes, yeah, to Iraq.
To Iraq, to where?
Samara.
Oh, yeah, in Samara. Was it, and for a 12-month, I assume?
15 months.
15 months,
during the surge, yeah.
So how long after the 15 months being overseas did you like, all right, you're going to rope? How long did you?
So we got back in September, October, and I think it was January.
Yeah.
That they're like, all right, come on down.
Yeah,
here.
and then you start to turn the regimental churn. So, your time in the 75th, what did you learn? What does that mean to you? What did you gain from that time there that you still use today?
Well, let me first say that, when rope was over and I had, sort of graduated and been selected and all that, I felt like I was being drafted in the NFL. It was like that big of a deal for me, so I was really excited. What's really cool about it is I got to Delta Company 175 at the time when they were standing it up. So it was pretty cool to be able to be a part of kind of the standing up of that company. So our MLAT was a little bit different than everybody else because we had to go to NTC. And all that. One of the biggest lessons I learned early on was just the value of being uncomfortable.
Oh yeah.
Because I was a top tier officer by rating in the 82nd, and then I showed up at 1st Ranger Battalion, and I just felt light years behind. Real quickly, that learning curve jumped in, and I had to move out of my comfort zone, which causes growth.
I think it's interesting to bring that up because you hear that a lot, especially with the officers when they first come. They were number one, and they have to have a little humble pie when they get there, and somebody, either their company commander or the battalion commander, XO, will pull them aside at some point and go, "Guess who else was number one?" Yeah, everybody else that you're here with. So you got to start over as an officer a lot as you iterate in and out of the organization. So. The time that you had in the regiment, just a little bit about the time that you had there, the stuff you still use today or reflect on. Then you had a less than ceremoniously exit from the organization, if you could cover that a little bit. Sure. So deployed to Afghanistan with the company, which basically fulfilled a dream of mine to deploy as a Ranger with the regiment. Just a level of professionalism everywhere. So fortunately, my attitude, I think, was appropriate in that I didn't need that talking to that said, "Hey, dude, you need to chill out." I was more wide-eyed and like, I need to pick up my game. And I got up to speed. Unfortunately, my exit was not what I would have wanted it to be. I had a negligent discharge, which was embarrassing to say the least. One of the big things I learned after that, though, is that what makes the regiment great and what sets it apart is that it's higher standards. Yeah. And for a brief moment, I failed to meet that standard, and the result was appropriate and according. But the perspective of understanding what a standard is and raising it for others or around us or even yourself, I knew that going in, but that was a big thing there. And since then, I've really struggled with what happened and my, less than preferred exit from the unit in the Army. The other big thing that's really, really impacted me as far as that goes is the sense of identity. Yeah. All right. So, 1 minute I'm a 10 beret wearing barrel-chested Ranger that I always wanted to be. And then the next, basically I'm on my way out of the Army. I didn't leave the Army because of that. I left the Army because I didn't want to go back to the artillery world, and I wanted to go into business. But, regardless, 1 minute I'm one thing, and the next thing I'm not that. And if you tack on to, at the time, was my shame and my mistake, I lost a big part of me in that. And it's only been over the last couple of years with you, Ray Perez, Colonel Scholl, and others that I've been able to volunteer and give back. And the reason why I do that is because, first of all, I feel like anybody should be in a position to serve others with that which they've been given, their experiences, their talents, and all of that. But
I just carry a mentality of, here I am, send me. So when someone says, hey, can you come down here and do this? Roger that, I'm there. And I feel like I owe something back to the community for disappointing people at the time and myself.
So for those that don't know, like a negligent discharge, it's just when your weapon is discharged without the intent of doing it. And if you do that in the regiment, you're depending the circumstances and investigation and stuff, usually you're asked to leave the organization. Ultimately, you left the Army, as you said, not because of that. It probably helped contributed in making that decision. You know, it's a life-changing event when something like that happens, and just the way you found to give back. And I think you said it in the email that we had, we're not defined by our mistakes. Can you just elaborate on what that means a little bit?
Yeah, I think we're defined by, first of all, and this is my foundation, is my faith, but I think we're defined by what the Bible tells us as children of God, created in His likeness. But we're also determined by, we're also defined by what we do, what we actually do. Everybody makes mistakes, and that's not what makes you who you are. It's how you respond to that.
Right.
So over the past few years, I've gotten involved, like we talked about, and I'm on the board of directors of the U.S. Army Rangers Association, because I've been able to kind of use that whole thing and make my message, which is, you can stay connected to that community. Community is like paramount in kind of all facets of my life, because our identity should be tied to how we act and behave and treat others and the community that we associate with. And you can be a part of that and stay a part of that. Yeah,
and you spoke about a little bit already, your identity and finding your identity. And I think for guys that are transitioning or anybody in transition, right? It's about finding a community, right? It's about finding people to relate to and talk to and share with. And how has that been over you got out a while ago, that identity piece? Is it still something you're searching for? Or you found it, or is it not complete? Where is that at?
Yeah, I think I'll always be searching for it. I mean, when I left the military and I left the National Guard a couple years after I left active duty, I've always kind of kicked the idea around of going back in, based on my circumstances. I don't necessarily regret leaving. I think it was the right thing to do for me at the time, but there's always sort of that piece of me. And I've always said, if there was a reserve component Ranger unit, I would walk right down and do it. But I'll always, I think, search for that piece of identity, because it was so paramount and core to who I was at the time. And that's really what I enjoy about the U.S. Army Ranger Association, is that it's a membership-based association of those in the Ranger community, specifically after they leave. It's welcome to active duty guys too, but that's where, in my view, you can stay a part of that community through this association. When most guys leave and they just want to turn their back and pretend like it doesn't happen, maybe that's because they're frustrated or because they don't know any better, but you can continue in service to the community.
Absolutely. And I think once people do that, you start to see that you will start to drift back toward each other.
Yeah.
I've never been to your office before. As soon as I walked in, you said, this guy's son is in Ranger Regiment and this guy's on the U.S. Army Ranger Association. So we tend to find each other again, because we're high performers, as long as we continue to seek one another, right? As long as we continue to look for that community and I search for our identity and just never give up, right? That's the real key to it. And so in your transition, you did the 4 years. Mm-hmm. What'd you learn there? What's your 3 pieces of advice, or something you would do different, or something that you did right that you would do again that somebody should think about? Yeah,
I think what I did right is, and this kind of starts in my upbringing. My dad just always instilled in me to be the guy raising your hand. So football practice, I'd be the guy saying, I'll move the mats, put them away or whatever, or, in Ranger School, I'll be the guy to do area beautification, things like that. It was just, and I think people notice your willingness to give. Right. So that's something that started early, but it was really proven and confirmed in the military and after. If I gave myself one piece of advice, I would say kind of stop and smell the roses. Because even though I was where I dreamed of being, I was kind of so forward focused on sort of the next thing. And we kind of learned this at Ranger School, that like once, one foot in front of the other and that sort of thing. And if you don't stop and enjoy it, then what's it for? I mean, I never took a fancy, dress blues picture in my beret and all that stuff. So, I was just so focused on getting through what we were going through.
Right. I think on that point, I think as leaders, we have to realize that and enable people to focus on it,
Yeah.
right? So it's always easy when everybody says, I don't want to get my dress blues and take a photo. It's easy because I did it as a first sergeant. Like, well, then we won't do it. But now I'm like, man, I wish I would have done it because I didn't think about my mom who would love that photo, or my kids who would love it in years. So leaders, we have to own part of that too, own part of somebody else's journey to make sure that they're the most fulfilled. And then when you all that time in uniform, the surge, the coming to regiment, your exit from regiment, what was the most challenging day in uniform that you had?
I'll give you two answers because one, the most challenging day for me personally was the day after the ND, because it's kind of like waking up. Is this a nightmare and all that sort of stuff? Just, it was a silly mistake, but it's just embarrassing. But I want to put that in perspective to, guys that were lost and all that stuff. I would trade my career,
absolutely,
completely for anybody's, health or well-being and things. So those are always there as well. So though I say that was my kind of toughest day, it's in the perspective of, no one got hurt, and there are times that people did get hurt and
absolutely.
all that. So
That's an interesting. When I ask that question, I always get a range of answers and it's never what I expect. And it's hard to put a finger on what was the most challenging, and because for me, it's my formative. It was some of the best years of my life as well. Those last 20 and those 4 that you had. I'm sure you reflect on them with with fondness. So trying to pick that one day that was challenging is not something that you want to do necessarily but it's good for others to hear that everybody's gone thugh some struggle. So you transition out, you go and get your MBA at the University of Maryland. A lot of, the regiments now push, the Army's push now on education.
Yep.
What did the MBA mean for you? What did you gain from that? What were the challenges in getting your MBA? What's your advice just around anybody going to get it? The personality, who should go get one? Who should pursue that?
Great question. So I went to go get an MBA because I'd always been interested in investing in finance. And an MBA is great because it's broad. It's a mile wide and an inch deep. You get exposure to a bunch of different subjects. And I kind of knew that, so I could kind of get a taste of everything in business that I hadn't experienced in the Army and see sort of what I was actually good at. I did a nighttime program because I didn't want to go to school full time and forego a paycheck. So I worked in the defense sector there in D.C. and Pentagon in the meantime. But that was kind of my approach. The other thing that people say about an MBA is the network. So if you go to somewhere like Harvard or Emory or something, your network. But what I remind people, and this goes back to the community piece, is that the world works on relationships. Yeah. That's the way it works. People want to do business with people they like and trust. Probably trust first, but guess who is always going to trust you first and foremost above anybody else? A former Ranger.
Right, yeah.
So back to the community piece, I always tell people transitioning, stay connected to that, because those are the people that are going to help you find customers or jobs or networks or things like that. I'll put it this way, if anybody kind of hit me up on LinkedIn and said, hey, I see you're a Ranger, I'm a Ranger or a former Ranger, can I just pick your brain? 100%.
Yep.
Every time.
Yep.
Every time.
Yeah, that's what I tell people, to go into LinkedIn is find the veteran, find somebody you have something in common with, somebody who's been there before you, and they're more likely to reach back out to you and talk to you. Yep. And you're right, it's that instant trust, because you can look at somebody and go, oh, you were in 1st Battalion? And then the next question is usually like, when did you go to school? Yep. And then you've doubled your layer of vetting there, and you're like, oh, okay. And then right then you have an instant bond with somebody you've never known because you've through shared hardship. Right. Those that are scared of the MBA, myself included, who have thought about going and getting it. How was the academic portion of it? Because Maryland's a pretty good institution, well known, top 25. Given what poll you look at. Yeah. But how is that? Should somebody be scared of the MBA and going to get it?
No, because there's nothing about an MBA that can't be kind of worked through. It's all about work ethic. I mean, you could fail out if you don't do any of the work, but. And sometimes it's time consuming, but it's also, an MBA is not meant to be a weed out. Right. They want you to succeed. You got to pass the grades, but they're not there to shove you out if you're not good enough. And so it just takes a little bit of work ethic. And like I tell anybody that's in particular regiment or SOF, but veterans in general, bet on yourself anyway. Yeah. Whether it's an education or the next career path or whatever, you will rise to the top.
Right.
And it's proven itself again and again.
Yeah, and something we talked about before coming on, and we'll kind of transition into your corporate life and your entrepreneur, but you got to be ready to take a step back, maybe 2 steps back.
Yeah.
Because they don't know you. Don't have that trust. You can't walk in at the same level you were in uniform. But the 2 steps back might lead to 5 steps forward, a leap and bound forward. And just if you could elaborate on a little bit of what we discussed.
Yeah, absolutely. So every good move I've ever made in my life and career required a step back. I mean, I was an established platoon leader in the 82nd, and then I was a new unproven guy in 1st Ranger Battalion. And then I was a Ranger who left as a captain, and then I was some brand new guy at some defense consulting firm that knew nothing and started an MBA. When I graduated with my MBA, I came down here to Atlanta and worked at Merrill Lynch for 6 years and kind of the ultra high net worth, reputable, kind of, bureaucratic, climb the corporate ladder. But, when I graduated my MBA, I have all this experience in the Army and now private, but I was basically in an entry-level job on a very prominent team. Worked my way up to vice president, and now I'm an independent investor for folks. And I had to start from scratch to build kind of a practice and a business from nothing. So every good step that I've made required a step back because I could see into the future what I was looking to achieve.
Right, and I don't think sometimes service members in general, they don't realize that their whole career was a step back. Like you didn't get promoted to be a squad leader after you already did squad leader time. You got promoted on the potential that somebody saw in you to do it, and then you get it, and you went on and on. So a step back is not a bad thing. So you did the corporate part, and you're an entrepreneur or on your own. Break it down, and we'll go corporate first, because that's what a lot of they don't know what they want to do.
Right.
They don't want to take orders anymore, depending on how long you've been in the service. You want to go out on your own, or they just don't know how to break into the corporate space or what that looks like. So the corporate side, what are some of the pros and cons and things that are beneficial that you learned in that space?
Yeah. One thing I like to tell people about when they're looking at companies, especially big companies, where that might be a little less risky than the entrepreneurial side because it may be more stable and things like that. But the biggest determinant on your quality of life when you enter a new company, no matter what the size, is the day-to-day with the people that you're sitting next to. So you may be at, Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, which is this giant, reputable, great company, giant. But if you're sitting next to people that you don't want to be sitting next to, then I don't care how much you're getting paid, real quick you're going to be miserable.
Right.
So the culture piece, that people, the personalities of those that you're working with, and when I talk to veterans about how to communicate their value, especially special operations veterans, it's all about problem solving. You don't really need to talk about leadership, I was a leader and all that stuff, because what an employer really needs is to understand that you're going to come in there and solve problems. They know you're a leader. And that's the translation piece that's difficult is problem solving. I'm going to take that step back, that sense of humility, and that's how you know that you're going to rise to the top. And like I said before, again and again, guys will if they just trust themselves.
And you said it there, that humility, but even with humility, it's got to be a balance, because I see a lot of guys that are way too humble or don't talk about anything that they did in service, or don't think that has value because they didn't translate it. They didn't have the emotional intelligence and take the time. So everything's about trying to achieve balance. I don't think you can. But so then you transition in doing more stuff on your own. Mm-hmm. What have you learned, and what are the lessons learned in that space?
Again, kind of bet on yourself. There's an element of preparedness as well. So, if someone's transitioning and they're learning the way, the thing that they can remind themselves is that they're preparing. And then when you are prepared, you can make a move like that, whether it's another job or starting a business or things of that nature. So my corporate career after the Army was very much to prepare myself for kind of what I'm doing now, which has really allowed me to do, being self-employed has allowed me to be very involved in the community, my church community, the Ranger community. And I mean, the bottom line is, if you want to be considered valuable, you have to provide value.
Right.
So that's the whole networking thing, is when you go to network and meet people, you're not asking for cards so you can ask for things. You're there to say, how can I provide value to you?
Yeah.
Because then you become perceived as valuable.
Right.
So.
Yeah, that's great advice. And what was if you could say or think of it at the top of your head, the biggest difference from going uniform to the civilian side and yourself, like how do you provide that value? Because when you walk in a door as an Army officer, your value, at least at first, is right on your chest with that rank that you have a specific, but you don't have that everywhere else. So how do you provide that?
I think what's good about the business world, generally speaking, is it's a meritocracy. So, the marketplace will value where you're at. Yeah. So a lot of that is introspective. So if it's really important to you to have, something on your chest that commands respect, I would say, you may be getting respect, but that's based on position and not person,
right?
Or relationship. So you really got to find that. And again, leading anybody is going to be built on trust. It's going to be built on relationship, and that happens first by giving.
Right.
So that's what I really try to focus on is how can I give in order to get the respect, because respect is important to all of us,
right.
Me included. But I can't command respect if I haven't earned it.
Right.
So
absolutely. So we've talked about the Army. We've talked about your work life. Let's talk about the dad and the husband side of you. So back to that word vulnerability. What does that mean as a husband and a father?
Yeah. Humility, again, it goes back to that. And when I think of humility in the family context, it's what can I do to sacrifice for my family? What can I give to be there and serve my family? So, right. I think we should all serve others not as a task, but as a purpose in what we do. And it's especially the case with your family. And in a lot of ways, I've grown through that because I have a daughter with special needs. And that's just required me to have a level of grace, empathy, and patience that Captain Wright did not have before that,
Yeah. What's the, when you say the word empathy, can you elaborate on what's empathy mean to you?
Empathy means if you can somehow put yourself in their shoes, so to speak, in that moment. So if your kid is throwing a fit, why are they throwing a fit? Yeah, I get angry and I want to discipline too and all that sort of stuff. But what's the actual source here?
Right.
Or if you're in a spat with your wife, what is it actually that she's peeved about, rather than I got to win this argument?
Yeah. Right. Are you seeking to understand?
That's right.
Instead of being understood. Yes. Yeah. That's great. So you mentioned your daughter has cerebral palsy. Mm-hmm. How do you that's a life-changing event and something that's, probably takes part of your everyday as a planning process and things you have to do. And your wife is probably at home dealing with that when you're here or working. So how does that play a role in your life and how do you plan around it and the best you can?
Yeah, I think you said it well. We do the best we can. The big thing I think that has gotten us through is our faith in the Lord, who's brought us through, as well as, again, community. And I'll always go back to community because we should not go through life alone. Right. We shouldn't go through anything alone, whether it's a veteran, transitioning to a civilian or a new parent. I mean, we've had our challenges, but parenting in general is challenging. I don't ever minimize anybody's parenthood is less challenging. It's challenging, but why would you want to do that alone when you know that everyone around you is facing some of the same things? I think you find that in for me, it was my faith community. In my church and certainly getting connected to the veteran world as well, where again shared challenge. So
about on your faith, have you had struggles with your faith over the time? Can you speak about your faith? Because in the regiment you have a lot of different variations, and we have to be put in situations where we test our faith and we fall in and out of faith and have to find our way back to faith. What's faith? What's it mean in your life?
Yeah, so I don't know if I ever struggled with my faith, but I certainly have grown. Everybody has those moments where they're, it's a roller coaster, it's not a ramp, but it's the maturity and the growth. What it ultimately comes down to is we can't control everything. So if I have that belief and faith in a higher being, then I'm good. Because I know what the end of the story is based on specifically what the Bible tells me. So that's kind of it for me, and so.
Yeah, it's a big part, and like I said, we ebb and flow with faith, and you can lean on it to help get you through some times. And I encourage everybody to get out there and find something, the whole, whether it's your community, your faith, or your community and your faith together. So all that time, that you're at now, where you're at, if you could go back and you could talk to Lieutenant, Wright, what advice would you give him right now?
Yeah, I think just going back to what I said before, just enjoy where you're at. We're driven people. The personality, the type A personality that leads someone to and into the regiment is very driven, forward-looking, and we need that.
Yeah.
But appreciate along the way.
Yeah.
So just maintain gratitude.
Yeah, that is a great word, and it's been said over and over again from guests on this podcast that gratitude is the key to a lot of things. And so if people, part of the U.S. Army Ranger Association, what is it? What can it do for, guys? I'm about to retire.
Yeah.
I'm not tied to any of those right now, and I know it's something I'm going to do when I get out. So what does that do for you, or can it do for people?
Yeah, for me personally, it's just a way to give back. It's a volunteer thing, so I volunteered basically to help lead that association. But there are scholarship programs and there are assistance programs if guys are in financial trouble and things like that. But more importantly, it's just staying around like-minded people.
Right.
So whether it's a barbecue or a beer in your region, or we're going to go out and do the Moog Mile workout here in Atlanta this weekend, and all that. It's just a way to stay connected. And there are several kind of ranger-focused organizations in the nonprofit world. Three Rangers and Gallant Few Darby Project are great with the transition piece as a part of kind of the Ranger for Life world, and I work with Sergeant Major Hall on that some too. But you have the 75th Ranger Regiment Association and the U.S. Army Ranger Association, and I think those are the places, and USAR is much larger, but I think those are the places that you can stay a Ranger.
Right.
I was a Ranger. Well, I can still be a Ranger because what makes that is your association.
Right.
Not to repeat the word, but your association and your relationship with those people.
Right. And you have a podcast of your own. Where can people find it? What's the title of it?
It's called Pursuit of Service, and it's basically just kind of my lessons that I've learned from, I don't think I'm any smarter or brighter than anybody else, but I recognize that I've been in unique situations, from the Army to kind of a corporate career to entrepreneurial to church leadership. So I've observed kind of a lot in leadership along the way, and like I said before, the mantra of the podcast and sort of my philosophy is serve others not as a task, but as a purpose. Yeah. So that's what it's about.
And if you've listened to any other episodes of this podcast, that's another thing that is a theme from everybody. Yeah. It's service. Service is the way. Service is leadership. Service is the way to give back. Service is what fills my cup up, and I think it's probably the same for you. Yep. Jeff, I appreciate it. Yeah. Thanks for having me up here in Atlanta, in your beautiful office up here. I don't get up to Atlanta enough because the traffic just gets worse every year, right? It does, yeah. But I appreciate it. Yeah. Thanks for all you do for the regiment, for the Army, the U.S. Army Ranger Association, and just you're somebody who's a great mentor and friend, and I appreciate it. And thanks for coming on. Well, thanks for having me. I'm honored and humbled.